Tonight, Dr. Karen Corbin is going to talk about why diets don't work, the myths, the mysteries, and the truth. Now, we all know about them diets that don't work because I've tried a few of those myself. And as you can tell by looking at me, they haven't worked. Hopefully, tonight's session will help us to unravel some of the rumors, the suspicions, and the unfortunate mistruths that surround diet and nutrition. Dr. Corbin is a research assistant professor with the Nutrition Research Institute, leading studies around the role of nutritional and genetic components in obesity, fatty liver, and metabolic syndrome. She received her Ph.D. in molecular medicine in 2008 at the University of South Florida, and she joined the Nutrition Institute here in 2009 and was recently promoted to a full faculty position as research assistant professor in December of 2011. She has spent her last 17 years working in nutrition, and when you see her, you're going to see that it works because she looks good. She first worked as a registered dietitian and now as a Ph.D. And you know what? I did find out just by chance that, we all know what a Ph.D. is. But in her case, that D stands for dancing. But we'll let her talk about that. But she especially enjoys opportunities to educate others about healthy lifestyle choices, as you will see in this evening's presentation. So it's certainly my pleasure to introduce Dr. Karen Corbin.
Well, good evening and welcome. I'm really excited to see all of you here today. I've come to a couple of the sessions and been really impressed by how many of you have been coming, and you keep coming and you ask great questions. So I'm hoping that tonight we'll have a little bit of fun. We'll do a little science in between, but not so much science that I put you to sleep. And hopefully at the end you'll come out with some information that's useful to you that you can apply into your lives if it makes sense for you. So tonight, really, my goal is to talk about some things that I find very frustrating about the information that's communicated to the public about nutrition. Have you ever tried a product because it claims to do something and it doesn't work? Or you read something on a package and you think this is what I need to buy, and again, it doesn't work? Or you try diet after diet trying to lose weight or improve your cholesterol and it just doesn't work? Well, the reason is that overall, my standpoint is that diets don't work. And I'll define for you what I mean as we go through the talk. But before we move into the actual talk, I want to tell you a little bit about how I ended up here. It's a little bit interesting, and it also helps you see my point of view and why I'm so passionate about what we do here. So unless you've met me before, oh, by the way, if you see all these covered things, no worries. We're going to do some fun things, have some surprises. So just keep that in mind. You got to stay awake so you can participate in the fun. So unless you've met me before, you probably wouldn't guess that I was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And I won't talk a whole lot about that, but to say that retrospectively, looking back at my life, growing up for 9 years in a different country with a different language and different customs and different foods, has been really great for me to have a more global approach to nutrition. But from Puerto Rico, went to Florida, and believe it or not, even as a little girl growing up in Florida, I always loved science. And this was back in the 80s when there weren't a lot of women in science. So when all my friends were interested in other things, I had a chemistry set and a microscope. And so I've always sort of known in there somewhere that science was going to be part of what I do. And so I had two major passions growing up. One was science and one was dance. And I contemplated which way to go with my life. And thankfully, I chose science. I think that was the right choice. So the beginning of my training in science and nutrition was at Florida State University. And during that time, I sort of experienced my first turning point because I realized when I had an experience with research that, wow, this nutrition stuff really can be used to think broader about nutrition. When I finished my studies there, I was at the James A. Haley Veterans Hospital doing my dietetic internship so that I could become a registered dietitian. And during my time there, I learned lots of things about how to take the textbook knowledge and use it to work with people. But a turning point that I experienced there is that I met a very wise dietitian who said, you really shouldn't go into research until you have a plan and you have a goal of what you want to do with that research. And thankfully, I was wise enough to listen to her, so I decided, let me go be a dietitian for a while, because that's what I was supposed to do anyway. So I ended up at the Heart and Vascular Institute of Florida in St. Petersburg, and I was there for 5 years, working in a lipid clinic and a diabetes program. And that's where a lot of aha moments happened in my mind about what I really needed to do. So I worked with a very large group of physicians who believed in evidence-based medicine. I hadn't really heard of that or really even knew what that was. But when those physicians would take our group and sit around a table and they'd pull out scientific papers and say, are we doing the best we can for our patients based on this study or this study, and they would actually change what they did, I thought, what a concept, using science to improve medicine. So that was one major turning point for me. Another turning point was when early on in learning about cardiology, because honestly in the beginning I didn't know a whole lot, there was a statement made by one of our physicians that for about half the people who have heart attacks, we can predict that they might have one because they have risk factors like high blood pressure or diabetes. But for the other half, we have no idea if they're going to have a heart attack. Those risk factors don't make a difference. And I thought to myself, well, that just doesn't quite seem good enough that we can only predict half. So I started thinking there's got to be more we can do. And what really made me think I have got to do something different was working with patients. If you know me, you already know that I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. In fact, I've even been called an overthinker at times, which makes no sense to me. There's no such thing. So I was able to help a lot of people with the things I learned about nutrition. But then there were these other people who would do exactly what I said. And I believe that they really were doing exactly what I said. But they weren't losing weight. Their cholesterol wasn't getting better. Their blood sugars weren't getting any better. That really bothered me. I felt like there should be more that I can do. And I'll give you two brief examples. I had one patient, and I don't have a very good memory. You can ask my husband. But certain things really stick in my mind. So these must have been it really altered the way I felt about nutrition because they're still in my head a lot of years later. I had one patient, 40 years old, skinny as a rail, ran marathons, couldn't find a darn thing wrong with his diet, and at age 40 already had quadruple bypass. This doesn't make sense to me. This doesn't seem right. On top of that, his vessels kept plugging right back up, and we could not control his cholesterol and every medicine on the market. And I thought to myself, okay, there's got to be more we can do. A second example was sort of the other side of the coin, where I had a young lady, 26, came to see me because of high blood sugar. And her mother, who was in her 60s, had just been diagnosed with diabetes. And I'm thinking, why is this young lady, who should have similar genetics and probably be diabetic at around age 60, why is she diabetic at age 26? Well, it didn't take me long to figure out that she was in the car driving towards diabetes with her foot on the accelerator because she was drinking a case of Coke every day. So she was she had the genetic predisposition, but she took it and she pushed it all the way to the other side. So I thought to myself, I need to dedicate the rest of my career to contributing to science that'll help us do better in the way we use nutrition to protect your health. So off I went to the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida, College of Medicine. I got my degree in basically molecular biology because I felt that the answers were at the cellular level, that we really had to dig deep to understand how nutrients worked. And from that point in time, I learned something really important. See, when I was a dietitian in the late 90s, there wasn't any talk about the human genome and how that affected your diet because we hadn't sequenced the human genome yet. We didn't know all the letters in the genome. And one of my first classes, my Ph.D. program, was to teach me all about that. And the whole time I'm going, that's it. This is what I need to be doing. This is where the answers are. So I was about a year away from finishing, and I went to Google. I do a lot of Googling. And I just put nutrition research. And the very first hit on Google was this place called the Nutrition Research Institute and a place called Kannapolis, which I hadn't quite heard of. And I started reading about exploring nutritional individuality and all the resources they were building to tackle the problem of why diets don't work. And I kid you not, I thought to myself, they're building that place for me. I must go there. So I bothered Dr. Zeisel enough times until he said, you know what, next time you're in town, why don't we meet? Immediately, I'm calling the HR person. I'm going to be in town. I need to meet Dr. Zeisel. And I met with him, and within a couple of weeks, I was here. So I came here because of the promise of being at a place that could potentially be a worldwide leader in nutrition research. And I have to be really honest with you. I had very high expectations, and they weren't quite met. They were actually exceeded. I've really enjoyed the past 3 years here. I've really been able to capitalize on the fact that we have lots of universities, like Appalachian State. I see someone with an App State shirt. Doing a lot of collaboration, a lot of innovative thinking. It's different than a regular college campus because we do have so many different points of view and so many different resources. So I've really enjoyed my time here, and my original plan was find a way to get to this NRI and probably stay there forever. And so far, that looks like where I might be heading. So I hope to be here for a very long time. So I'm telling you this because this path that's led me here has taken a lot of years to sort of evolve, and I'm very passionate about what I think we can do here. So with that said, what are we going to talk about today? Well, first, we're going to go through a few pervasive myths that I know all of you have heard of at one time or another. And then we're going to talk about how these myths are nothing more than a reflection of the complexity of science. And finally, I will go through some practical information that maybe will be useful to you as you try to be healthier. So, the myths. Does one diet fit all? Well, I remember distinctly when I was starting my nutrition career as a clinical dietitian, what I call the diet spectrum. There were sort of two opposite ends of the spectrum. We had the no carbs guy who, carbs are really going to kill you. And then we had other guy, which I don't have his book. I got these all at a used bookstore. It's amazing how many books you can buy about diets. Programs that talked about no fat, never eat fat. It's not good for you. And in between that spectrum, there's all kinds of books. In fact, some of them I don't even know where they fall on the spectrum. I found this little gem, French Women Don't Get Fat. Who knows what this one's about? And some of these books have decent information in them, but there's a whole lot of them, and we love to buy them, so people keep writing them. I mean, I may as well write a few. I'll probably make some money because we tend to spend $60.9 billion in 2010 on diet books, potions, and lotions. And if you go to Amazon.com and you just say, I want to just look for a diet book, you're going to find about 23,000 of them, so good luck. And in fact, out of the top 150 ranked books between 1993 and 2008, so we're talking about literary masterpieces, 8 of them were diet books. So with all these books, why don't diets work? Why isn't there the book that we all have and we all follow? Well, I'll tell you why. There's a lot of misinformation, and one type of misinformation out there is when a specific food is villainized as being evil. So you can insert any food into that blank. Carbohydrates make you gain weight. Fat is bad for you. Well, if both carbohydrates and fat are bad for you, we're down to eating cardboard. So they both can't be true. And then there's a lot of claims that foods are causative of disease, like heart disease or diabetes or cancer. And I want to spend a few minutes on that because that's something that can cause a lot of confusion. So do nutrients cause disease? Well, let's learn something really important. There is a giant difference between a cause and an association. So the only way that I can prove that eating a specific food causes a disease, I would have to take about a room 20 size this large, full of people, lock them up, control everything they think, everything they breathe, everything they do, all their exercise, and everything they put in their mouth, and then maybe I would be able to say that a certain food caused a disease, and only if they only ate one food that whole entire time. So it's nearly impossible to blame any food for causing disease. Now, the best we can do, and it's still helpful, is talk about foods that may be associated with disease. So what that means is that scientists will study a group of people for a certain period of time and assess what they eat. And they'll say, aha, this group over here ate a whole lot of X, and they had more of this disease. And this group over here didn't eat very much of X, and they didn't have this disease. So this food is associated with disease. But you know what? Even in the group that ate a lot of the food and had more disease, there are still people that didn't get disease. And the same is true in the other group. People who didn't eat the food ever did get disease. So it's never that direct. And keep in mind also that even healthy foods can be associated with harm if you eat too much. You probably remember Dr. Zeisel's talk about antioxidants and cancer. What did he tell you? If you load yourself up with a ton of antioxidants, you might actually be causing yourself harm, especially if you already have precancerous cells that love the antioxidants. So the other thing is that you often will hear something in the news or you'll see something in a magazine about a study with a disease association, and you have to remember you can't jump to a conclusion based on one single study. So why do these studies show different results sometimes? One day fat is good for you, one day fat is bad for you. Which one is it? Well, the reason that you can have conflict is not because scientists don't know what they're doing or they're confused. It's for a lot of reasons. First of all, especially in human research, it's really hard to control every single variable. Remember my example of locking all of you up in a room? It's really hard. So a lot of times you think this is what's associated with the disease, but it's really this other thing that you weren't controlling for or measuring. Also, scientific methods have ways that they're useful and ways that they're not so optimal. So especially when it comes to understanding what all of you eat, do you know how I can understand what you eat? I need to ask you, right? So that means for me to quantify what you eat, you can't forget anything. You have to write everything down, weigh everything, and you can't lie to me. So it's not so easy to know exactly what people eat. So there's limitations. Finally, if a study is done in a few people, it may not be quite so strong as a study done in a lot more people. And finally, the characteristics of the people studied make a big difference. What region of the country, what heritage they have. Maybe they live in Colorado where lots of people like to ride bikes and hike and walk their dogs. It can be any number of things. So I'm not saying that none of these studies are worth beans. I'm saying that you have to take them all with a grain of salt and understand a trend over many studies rather than thinking about the one study that's getting a lot of press. So with that being said, how do you find scientific information about nutrition? So scientists in the room know this because we go to this database all the time. But if you're not a scientist and you want to look something up, you can look it up too. And I wanted to show you that particular website really quickly to give you an example, and the link is on the slide. So we're going to go to it right now if the computer's nice to me. Okay, so it's called PubMed. If you can do a Google search, you can do a PubMed search. And I want to know whether dairy causes cancer. So I'm going to put dairy and cancer. Enter. See? Just that simple. And under here, under results, there's 1,307 publications that talk about dairy and cancer. And what I would suggest is if you're interested in any specific topic, scroll down to where it says review. A review is a paper where scientists or group of scientists have taken the collective literature around a topic and they summarize it for you and tell you this is what we think the big picture is. And that's a great way to start, is to look at the big picture. So we still have 196 papers to go through. You can imagine why I spend a lot of time on this website. So I have to filter through and figure out which are the papers that I want to read. So we'll pick one. This one says the Mediterranean Diet and Cancer Prevention, a review. Sounds interesting. So unless you are connected to a university library, you may not be able to get the whole paper for free. But everybody can get the abstract, which is a summary, and can still give you some clues. So we'll read the last sentence in this paper. Although there is a lack of definitive evidence for the association of Mediterranean diet with various types of cancer, a dietary pattern emphasizing the consumptions of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, and low-fat dairy products could be highly recommended for all people. So that gives you some clue of some of the consensus. You're going to find another paper that may say something different, but you get a sense that there's some truth in all of it, perhaps. So keep in mind also that not all publications are created equal. When they make it to PubMed, they have to have a certain level of scientific rigor, but there's some that are better than others, and sometimes you have to be careful when you look at the authors of the paper. If they happen to work for the dairy farmers and they're the ones writing the paper, well, they may not be as objective. I'm not saying they're not. I'm saying they may not be. So that's how you get information. So there's no reason why you can't be informed. Now, myth number 2, I want to talk about supplements. And when I say supplements, I mean either a vitamin pill or some ingredient that's supplemented into the food supply. And we have this notion that if something's good for you, more must be better. And you hear things like, this is clinically proven to do X, solve all your problems. I don't know. Do you know what clinically proven means? Not a whole lot. And I'll tell you why. Because when I was practicing as a dietitian, I would get all these faxes from a company selling some sort of product for weight loss. And, this was back when there wasn't as much internet, so they're wasting my paper and my ink, and this was just not a product that I believed in. So I called them up because they said, clinically proven, research shows. Called them up and said, can you please send me the references for the research that you've done on this product? Click. There wasn't any. So be careful when you hear clinically proven. If it's not in PubMed, it didn't happen. Or at least it didn't happen in a way that peers that are scientists thought was valuable enough to publish. So I want to give you an example about a different type of supplement, not a vitamin, but an ingredient. So let's talk about the story of trans fats. You've heard of trans fats, I'm sure of it. And trans fats is basically a way to describe taking a liquid fat and converting it to a slightly more solid fat by a process of adding hydrogen or hydrogenation. And it was introduced into our food supply in 1911 for good reason, because it could replace butter fat, and we all knew, well, butter's supposed to be bad, right? So let's get it out of here. It was supposed to improve shelf life and reduce saturated fat in foods. Seemed like a good idea at the time until the 1990s, when we figured out that these fats are very similar to saturated fats and indeed are associated with increased risk of heart disease. Oops. So since that time, there's been a lot of reduction of trans fat from the general food supply. Some places are banning trans fats, and even some countries can't even go eat trans fat in certain countries. And it's good because now we have a lot less trans fat floating in our bloodstream. A recent paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association shows that in the blood of the people they studied, there's about half the trans fat now than there used to be. So it's coming down. And by the way, I didn't mention this yet, but at the bottom of my slides, and boy, that's really hard to see, but you have printed copies, and I try to make the font big. I give you a reference that you can look up in PubMed. So if you're wondering if I'm telling you a bunch of hooey, you just look it up and see what you think. So this is an example of how making changes into the food supply before fully understanding the ramifications can be quite dangerous. And I really hope that food manufacturers have learned a big lesson from this and are a little more careful. And are there other examples of foods that are supplemented in our diet? Absolutely. One that I think of quite a lot is folic acid. Folic acid was added to our grains back in 1998 for good reason, because scientists figured out that we can reduce birth defects if mom gets enough folic acid. And that's actually helped. There's definitely an association between increased folic acid in the food supply and birth defects, and some people get a lot of benefit from this folic acid. The problem is that at the same time we figured out certain people with some genetic variations actually do worse with the extra folic acid. So I think we have to be really careful about saying we're going to give this to everybody, because it may not be the way to go. So myth number 3 is the front of the package hype. So when you pick up a food at the grocery store, what the marketing folks at the food companies like to do is highlight the positive, sometimes the obvious, and conveniently forget to mention the negatives. So it can be very confusing, and I just want to give you a few tips. First of all, never just go by what's on the front of the package. Always turn it over and look at the nutrition label and the ingredients list to see if this food is right for you. Now, more importantly, a lot of times a food will have something on it like cholesterol-free, when every other food that's just like it is also cholesterol-free, so it's not like an aha moment. They're all cholesterol-free. So if you're thinking of spending an extra $10 to buy the one with the fancy front of the label claim, look at the other products and see if they're exactly the same and save yourself some money. And what if you want to look some stuff up and learn about what's in foods that maybe don't have labels, or you're just curious? Well, a couple of websites totally free that you can go to and look up any food you want. The USDA Food Composition Database and Nutrition Data. The USDA database is a little more scientific, and maybe in the sense that it doesn't have a lot of the brands you might think of. They might just have cola. And so they take averages of similar colas. Well, let me tell you, if you look at one cola versus another, there's some differences. But it still gives you a good idea. Or if you want to know how much choline's in something, don't just take someone's word for it. Just look it up. It's no problem. And the good thing about these databases is that they give you way more information than what's on the food label. So if you're interested in a specific nutrient, you can find out. So hopefully that's useful for you. So we'll get to our final myth, or possible source of confusion, may I say. And this is your diet based on your genes. So there's sort of two sides of my thought process here. Number one, should we be thinking about DNA as a way to individualize diets? And number two, are we ready today, March 6, 2012, to be prescribing diets based on DNA? And I'm not going to tell you the answer to the question, because what I'm going to do is give you some information so that you can decide for yourself. So with all these myths, and there's so many more, we could be here all night with myths. So how do you navigate the components of a healthy eating plan to pick out what might be more of a myth and what might be more of reality? Well, first, if you're considering a specific diet, like maybe, I don't know, the Duke diet. There's no Chapel Hill diet, but there is a Duke diet. Think about this. Does it provide adequate nutrients? Or does it say, well, when you follow this plan, you need to go out and buy all these supplements from me so that you can get adequate nutrients? That's a big red flag right there. You shouldn't have to supplement with a bunch of stuff just to get adequate nutrients. Number two, does the eating plan take into account your health conditions? A great example that I love, because this book came out when I was in clinical practice and people loved it. Eat right for your blood type. Okay, let's think about this. There's only like 4 blood types. So you mean everybody who's a type O has the exact same needs. Maybe what if one's diabetic and one's not diabetic? So if the diet is ignoring the fact that you may have some condition you need to address, but they say that everybody should be eating this way, you might want to think about it. And finally, it does no harm. So if you go on some, I have so many books down here, it's ridiculous. If you go on any diet and you don't feel good, that's a really big clue that it's probably not the one for you. And what's interesting, and what gets us to our next section, is that these components will not be the same for all people. And that's where the mysteries come in. So let's start by talking about what is a nutrition requirement. Well, a nutrition requirement is basically the quantity of a nutrient that's going to minimize the risk of you getting sick because you didn't quite get enough of it. So that's something as extreme as getting enough vitamin C so you don't get scurvy. And scurvy is a disease we don't really see much of, probably at all, in westernized societies. But it's sort of like the bare minimum to keep people like okay. And it's based on general criteria, like whether you're male, female, your age group. And it's intended to address generally healthy populations. And it's also based on averages that provide the amount of nutrient that will work for most people. Thing is, when we think about the story of responders and non-responders that I've learned quite a lot since working with Dr. Zeisel, is that these amounts are based on this bell curve. So this red line is the amount of a nutrient that's sufficient to lead to optimal function for most people, the people that are right in the middle of this curve. But you can see that there's some people way over here and way over here that level of nutrient is not right for them. So the question is, do we care? I mean, does it matter that much if some people on the ends here aren't quite getting what they need? Well, this is one of my aha moments from being here, is learning about choline. See, Dr. Z is in Germany, so he's not listening to this, but quite honestly, I hadn't heard about choline until I met him. So I had no clue about anything having to do with choline, but now I know just a skosh more than I used to. So this study is one that really made me think, wow, this whole thing about nutritional individuality is very real. So Dr. Zeisel, in his infinite wisdom, thought he needed to lock people up for a little bit to control their diet. So he enrolled people in a study where they were in a hospital for a couple of months. And during those couple of months, they ate what was fed to them. And the goal was to find out, do people really need to get choline from the diet, or do they make enough? Because we do make choline inside our bodies. So what to me was most astonishing about the study is that some people had health problems such as fatty liver or muscle damage when we put everybody on the adequate amount of choline based on those official recommendations. Wow, so these people obviously were eating a whole lot more choline before they came in, and when we put them on the average, they got sick. Then what he and his team did was took choline basically away for up to 42 days and checked blood and checked liver and checked all kinds of stuff every other day, and to see if anybody got sick. Nobody believed him that anybody was going to get sick, by the way. So what happened was that some people went those whole 42 days with almost no choline. They were perfectly fine. Nothing happened to them. Maybe if we'd kept them on low choline for longer, something would have happened, but at least during that period, nothing happened. We also saw that premenopausal women were less likely to have that fatty liver or muscle damage, and people with certain gene mutations were more likely to have the problem. So to me, that's when it became absolutely clear that we may not know everything yet, but there's definite factors that make the requirement for choline very individual, and quite likely almost everything else that we put in our mouth. So what makes us so different anyway? Well, there's a lot of stuff. DNA is one of them. And DNA is quite complicated. We'll talk a little more about it. When we talk about DNA, there's a sequence of letters of your DNA. Then that DNA has to do something. That's the function, and you could have problems at that point. And there's also modifications that can occur on the DNA. So there's a lot of stuff going on with DNA, but also environment, what to eat, how much you exercise, pollution you're exposed to, that can make you different. Your heritage, where you were born, where you've lived and where you live now. Gender, for sure. You know, it's really cool. My husband likes this store in Chapel Hill called Southern Season, and they have lots of food, including a lot of chocolate, which I love. And he brought me some chocolate from Belgium. And I was amazed that their nutrition facts label had different values for males and females. I thought, wow, somebody's finally getting it. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Not the same. As you age, your requirements change. If you get afflicted with a disease, your requirements change. And as we learned from Dr. Spencer a couple weeks ago, those little bacteria that live in your intestine can also affect your requirements. So all these things and many others sort of come together to come up with your biological signature, which is as unique as your fingerprint, and that's what defines what you really need. So we talk about DNA a lot, and for good reason, and I want to define a few terms for you. For some of you in the room, the concept of DNA and genetics may be crystal clear, and for others of you, like my friend Melanie Spencer would say, it's as clear as mud. So I would like to define a few concepts for you, just so that we're at the same page. And before I forget, because I know I will, at the bottom I give you a link to the Genetics Home Reference. And that's a really nice website put out by the NIH, intended for a general audience. If you really want to learn lots of the intricacies of DNA, it's a really great website. So what is DNA anyway? It's basically a string of letters. And these letters are officially called bases, but for our purposes, let's think of them as letters. And we each have 3 billion of them, many copies of them in all our cells. 3 billion. And there's only 4 letters, A, T, C, G. And these letters basically spell out the instructions for how our bodies should function. Now, we talk about genes a lot. Well, what is gene compared to DNA? Well, a gene is basically a specific section of those letters that has instructions to make a functioning protein. And the proteins in our body are basically these molecules that do all the work. So a gene may be made up of 10,000 letters, sometimes it's made up of 100,000 letters, but it's just a subsection of your DNA. And we each have about 30,000 genes. And what adds to the complexity of DNA is that we only know the function of about half of those genes. So we're still learning quite a lot about what all those genes actually do. So we don't know it all. Now, we talk a lot about genetic variation, and if you've heard Dr. Zeisel talk in the past, you've heard him talk about SNPs, SNP, or SNPS. That stands for single. Sorry, folks, I killed the microphone. Don't know why. It didn't like me. Okay, so genetic variation, or these SNPs, are single changes in one letter of your DNA. And you would think, well, who cares? You have 3 billion, right? Does one little letter change even matter at all? You have a look on your face. Is something wrong? Oh, yeah. I'm like, what? That's my friend Rebecca. She's looking like mortified. I'm like, what? Sorry. So these little single base changes can actually make a lot of difference in the way your DNA functions. And we all have millions of them. So even though in general, the DNA between one person and another is 99.9% alike, that 0.1% of difference can equate to several million differences that really can change what we need and how our body works. So I like concepts. I'm not very good at memorizing a lot of facts, but I'm good when I have a concept, because once I have the concept, I'm good to go. So the sheer magnitude of having 3 billion letters and possibly 3 million little differences, and we all have a different combination of these differences, means that there's infinite possibilities for the way we're different. So if I told you there's about 1,300 letters on the screen, if I told you, okay, I'm going to tell you 10 of these letters, and you're going to tell me all the rest of them, you're just going to know them, that doesn't make any sense. That makes about as much sense as me expecting you to solve the Wheel of Fortune puzzle with only one letter. So my point is that only knowing a few letters doesn't tell you a whole lot. Now, let's think about this in the concept of metabolism. Now, I know you can't read this, and with so much light in here, it's totally washed out. So no worries. I didn't expect you to see all of it. I just want to make a point. So what I have up on the screen are a bunch of metabolic processes, and they're all in different colors. And all I want you to glean from this is that metabolism doesn't happen in isolation. So the metabolism of sugars and of fats and of proteins, it's all linked together totally. So if these little differences make a big difference, and you put up a set of differences, an X that I just put up means that metabolism is slowed down, and a plus means that it's sped up. Because everything's integrated, those little changes affect the whole thing. They don't just affect that one little spot. So if these are your specific variations, but the guy next to you has these different ones, it's completely different. So variation, even though it's not a big amount relative to how much DNA we have, makes a big difference in the whole picture. That's why a lot of times medicines have side effects, because we target this metabolic pathway, and by default, it means we're affecting a lot of other things because everything's connected. So let's go back to DNA and nutrition requirements. Should we be thinking about DNA and how it affects nutrition requirements? Well, we already know, and I've mentioned, that if you have certain genetic variations, your choline requirements are different. Well, this is also true for a lot of other nutrients: folic acid, saturated fat, and salt. Do you remember the time where we always talked about don't eat any salt, it's bad for your blood pressure? And all of a sudden in the media they were like, oops, never mind, eat all the salt you want, it doesn't really affect your blood pressure. Well, which one of those is true? It's actually both. Certain people with genetic variation in the genes that control blood pressure are very sensitive to the amount of salt that they eat, while other people aren't as sensitive. Now, that doesn't mean run out and find out if you're salt sensitive so you can eat all the salt you want. Because what I say earlier, even a good thing can have some harmful effects. So everything has to be in balance. So, number one, should we be thinking about DNA as a way to prescribe diets? And I hope that you've seen that the answer is yes, we definitely should be thinking about it. But are we ready? Should you go to one of these websites where you pay $500 and they measure like 10 of your letters and they promise you that they can tell you exactly what you eat based on 10 out of your 3 billion letters? You know what I think. It's up to you to decide what you think about that. So DNA doesn't just control what you need to be eating. It can control or be associated with disease risk. And I want to mention this for a reason that's exciting to me personally in my research. So you can think of your DNA as either a risk factor or a protective factor, just like you can think of blood pressure or cholesterol or blood sugar as a potential risk factor. And the difficulty with thinking about genetic variation is that it's going to take scientists a little while to understand all these millions of variations and all these different genes. So we need to think bigger. And in the research that I'm finishing up now, in conjunction with several people here at Chapel Hill and at Duke, is that when you think just a little bigger and start looking across not just one of those little letters, but a pattern across a bunch of different genes, we can learn a whole lot more about the factors that could be controlling something like fatty liver or obesity. So hoping to submit this paper in a few weeks, and I hope it's really helpful for scientists to be thinking a little more differently about DNA and disease. I get this question a lot. Is there a skinny gene, and if so, can I please have one? Can you please give me the skinny gene? So I think it's important for me to talk about that. Is there a skinny gene? Maybe. There are definitely genes that we can actually remove genes from mouse DNA. So cool. Whoever invented that is awesome. So we can take a gene out of a mouse and say, what happens if you don't have this gene? Well, sometimes you do that and you have the heavy mouse on the one side of the scale. And definitely in humans, there's a whole lot of research on specific genes and specific variations that are associated with being lean or being heavy. But it's not quite that simple. And I want to highlight the study that we just published out of our lab. One of our grad students just published this. We took a gene out of a mouse that metabolizes choline. And lo and behold, those mice had very little body fat. They were so lean, and it's like, yay, this is awesome. But by the time they were about a year old, most of them had liver cancer. Darn it. So it's not just that simple. We can't just shut off or turn on one gene and fix everything. But this is the type of work we do because we start piecing it together and try to understand what are the mechanisms that control how fat is deposited. And this mouse is going to be really important for helping us do that. In fact, everybody wants the mouse. We get requests all the time. Can we have this mouse? We need this mouse. We need to look at this mouse. So it's really exciting. And there's lots of other examples where you knock one pathway out and you get a benefit and you get all excited, and then later on you find out, well, it's not always beneficial. So I talked an awful lot about DNA. And so are you totally a slave to your genes? That code of instructions, does it totally predestine you for the rest of your life? Well, the answer is absolutely not. And that magazine cover you see is from Time Magazine 2010, and they're talking about just that. So I know you'll hear about some of these things, and I want to mention one specific concept that I think is really important. And that is the term epigenetics. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't, and I can tell you right now, the first time I heard it in graduate school, I said, what? I have no idea what this guy's talking about. I don't understand, but I'm going to explain it to you. So we talked about the letters. We have 3 billion of them, A, T, C, G. Those pretty much stay constant for the rest of your life, unless there's some rare event like exposure to radiation or something that causes a mutation. But for the most part, you have these instructions. But epigenetics is a relatively new field. It took off somewhere, I think, in the early 2000s, where it started becoming really prominent. Is we figured out, oh boy, the DNA doesn't just sit there with nothing on it. Stuff gets attached to it that changes its function. So think about it like your DNA is a charm bracelet. So without these modifications, the DNA is what it is, the sequence of letters. Then you put a charm on it. The charm bracelet's still exactly the same, but you added a modification to it. That's basically what epigenetics is. And here it's depicted. Here's the DNA double helix. And all the little sticks sticking into the middle are the A's, T's, C's, and G's, but drawn in a way that makes sense to a chemist. Not as much to me, but I know that one of them's an A somewhere, and one's a T, and one's a C, and one's a G. And then these little bright spots here, those are epigenetic modifications. Those are, the letters are still there, just something got stuck to it and changed the way it functioned. And the reason I'm mentioning this is not because I think you need to understand everything about epigenetics, but this is a key way that your DNA integrates your environment and changes the way your health outcomes are. So the best example I can give you of epigenetics is twins. If you have identical twins, their DNA sequence is exactly the same. That is definition of an identical twin. But they don't always get the same health outcome. One may get diabetes, and most of the time the other one does too, but not always. We learned from Dr. May a couple weeks ago that with fetal alcohol syndrome, you could have the two identical twins in the same womb, and one gets fetal alcohol syndrome more severely than another one, but they have the exact same DNA. Well, part of what we're learning is that these extra marks, these charms on the charm bracelet, are not the same in those two twins, and that's what controls it. So this is going to become more and more prominent in our thinking and in our understanding of nutrition science. So with all this said, look, the bottom line is basically that we've come a long way. And I mean, the term that I've been studying nutrition 17 years, that goes back to all the way from undergrad to today. I've been thinking about nutrition, doing nutrition, and I can tell you just in that time we've come a long way. But we still have a long way to go, and it's really important that we keep pushing forward because I believe that we can do better. I don't necessarily think we'll figure it all out. I don't think we'll have perfect diets and perfect everything, but we can definitely get better. So now we get to the most fun part of our talk, where we do some things together. So Hollywood may have the Dr. Oz show, but Kannapolis has the Dr. Karen show. So thank you, interns. Very nice. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to steal the idea of Dr. Oz. You know how he has his table, and then he has like an intestine under here, a liver. Well, I don't have anything that cool. I don't have access to stuff like that. But we're going to actually do some things together. So I'm going to find some people that look awake and friendly and have them come up and do a few things. So let's talk about practicalities here and start with portions. How much have portions really changed over time, and how much are we really eating? Well, portions have changed a lot, and these next two slides are from a presentation from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. It's free online, and it's nice because it really quantifies things, and I like numbers and quantification. So 20 years ago, your cup of coffee with whole milk and sugar, 45 calories. Your standard cup of coffee today at your fancy coffee shop with your steamed whole milk and your mocha syrup, 350 calories. So that's an extra 305 calories right there. Now, what our moms and grandmas used to think about a turkey sandwich was, looks something like this. 320 calories. You go to your neighborhood sub shop, and when you get a turkey sandwich, it looks like this. And the problem is, if you have the big one in front of you, you're probably going to end up eating more, right? So the sandwiches today provide you with an extra 500 calories. So let's talk a little about portions. I think I'm going to pick on my App State friend right here. Yep, because I liked your shirt, and I love App State because they've helped me a lot. I want you to come on up here. We'll start with our first little exercise here. So do you eat cereal?
I do.
Okay, perfect. I meant to ask that before I picked my volunteer. So what we have here is a food scale. And I think food scales are great because if you want to know how much you're eating, you've got to quantify it. The only way you're going to do that is with a scale. Well, you can measure it too, but scales are really nice. So if you could hit the on button right there, this blue one there, good. And this one, okay. You hit that, and when it's ready for you, I want you, okay, it's ready. Put that bowl on there. Yep. Yep. And now hit the button that says 0. Right here. Perfect. So what I just had her do was put the bowl on top of the scale and cancel out the weight of the bowl. Now, I want you to take this box of cereal and put in what you might eat in the morning on a regular basis. If you spill some, that's fine. No big deal. Okay, good. Is that about right for you, you think? Okay, what does the scale read? 53 grams. Okay. I'm going to help you out here, and I'm going to say, what is one serving of this cereal? 30 grams. So we just about doubled the serving. Now, I'm not saying you can only have one serving of something. That's not absolutely right. But if you're thinking you're only getting 110 calories, well, you're probably getting more like 200 or so. Now, one trick that helps quite a lot is to use a smaller bowl, because if you have a smaller bowl, you're less likely to overdo it. So go ahead and do the same thing. Put the bowl on there and zero it out. Fill it all the way to the top. And let's see how much can fit into this bowl. Good. How much is there? 36 grams, a whole lot better. And by the time you account for the room for the milk, you're much closer. Look, thank you very much. I don't have a prize for you. I'm not fancy like Dr. Oz that can give you a cruise to the Bahamas. Sorry. Maybe one day. Maybe I can sign that poster and auction it on eBay and win enough money to buy you some prizes. So definitely the size of your plate makes a really gigantic difference in how much you eat. Because really, especially if you eat pretty quickly, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between double the portion and single the portion. You're going to put it in and you're going to feel about the same. So we need to sort of get our minds in line by using a smaller bowl and not just going by how we feel. Okay. So now I want to talk about sugar. And sugar has gotten a lot of press with scientists lately because in a recent publication in the journal called Nature, which out of the many thousands of journals out there, they all get ranked as to how credible people think they are, and this is one of the top ones, either number 1 or number 2 every year. So these scientists were saying sugar is sneaking into our diets in massive proportions. In the past 50 years, by the way, consumption of sugar has tripled worldwide. And they were also stating that they feel that sugar is reaching toxic levels in our diet. In fact, for the first time in human history, chronic diseases such as heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, which can be affected quite dramatically by our lifestyle choices, they're killing more people than infectious disease. So back way early in history, if you were going to die, you weren't going to die of heart disease, you're probably going to die of an infectious disease. And now there's this trend, sugar going up in our diets, chronic disease going up. Is that a cause or an association? Association, yes, you were listening. So they proposed that sugar should be controlled like other toxic things like cigarettes and alcohol. It's an interesting thought. I'm not going to say if I agree or disagree, but let's see whether we should be thinking about sugar a little more. So now I need someone else who looks friendly and willing to put up with I did pretty good with my little tricks here. So how many of you drink regular soda, not diet, regular? Nobody's going to admit it? Okay, good. You're right in the front row, so you get to come and help me. Okay, so I want to highlight sugar and think about whether we're getting a lot of sugar. So what I'd like you to do is put that cup on there and zero it out just like we did with the, yes, perfect. And I forgot to open my sugar. Perfect. Now, I want you to pour the sugar in that cup until that scale reads 98. So the question I'm trying to answer here is there a lot more sugar in food than we think of? And if you go a little over or you spill some, that's okay. Good. See, it's a lot of sugar, 98 grams. But sometimes we don't know what 98 grams means. Now you're going to see one. Perfect. So can everybody see what 98 grams of sugar looks like? Anybody want to eat this? Does it look appetizing? No?
How much would that be in a glass of tea?
I know. See, you jumped the gun on me. So this is how much sugar is in about 30 ounces of soda. So if you had filled this cup all the way to the top with Coke or Pepsi or comparable soda that I'm not picking on any brand, this is how much sugar you would be eating. Thank you. You can have a seat. So we are getting, I believe, quite a lot more added sugar in our diet than we think. Now, when you think about the fact that when you go to the movies, this is a medium, which is way bigger than this, and this is a large, and by the way, if you buy the large, you can get free refills. Oh, lovely, more sugar. So I do believe we should be careful about sugar, but here's the thing. Sugar in a natural food like an apple, a banana, that comes in a package that also includes fiber, antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, and all kinds of other stuff that's good for you. So that package means that all those nutrients are acting together to help you be healthier. So a little sugar from a piece of fruit, I'm not that worried about. But when you're talking about sugar, and by the way, an apple would have somewhere around 15 grams. This is 98. So this is a whole heck of a lot more, right? When you're drinking that syrup, you're getting sugar, water, chemicals, food color. Not a single thing in this glass is doing a darn thing for you. So it's not the same because of the package that it comes in. So we definitely should be worried about sugar. I'm not sure about treating it like alcohol or cigarettes, because that just sounds like an expensive bunch of laws that would be hard to treat. But how about we educate people and find ways to not get so much syrup in our diets? So the final thing I want to talk about are small steps, because I saw patients for 5 years, so I know the struggles. I've heard the stories. I know it's not easy. And by the way, it's not easy for me either. I moved to North Carolina, and I gained 12 pounds. I don't know why. I really hadn't even noticed it, except I kept having to buy new pants. And I said, this has got to stop. So I started exercising a little bit more, and that took care of the problem. So I do have to work just like everybody else. But I know that sometimes you get to a point where you think, I've gained so much weight, how am I ever going to get out of this hole? Or my diet is such a mess, it's hopeless. I don't think that I can really change it because, frankly, I don't want to. Eating healthy is too difficult, boring, and frankly impossible. So I want to talk about small changes and give you the 5-pound challenge. And I've been picking at people in the front row, so I'm going to pick on you with a blue sweater. If you could come up here for a minute, if you don't mind. I don't want to force you. So this is what 5 pounds of fat looks like. I want you to hold it and hold it with your arms out so that you can really feel it and see how comfortable that is. And when you get tired, you can put your arms down. So sounds like she's tired already. So fat, we used to think was the stuff that coated our bodies and kept us warm, like, the bears hibernating in the winter, and that's still absolutely true. But you learn from Dr. Swick's talk that fat releases hormones and it releases signals and that it can change your whole body makeup. Is that comfortable holding that 5 pounds? Like, could you hold it there forever? No. Probably not. You can put it down if you want. My point is, just those 5 pounds physically is taking a weight off of your joints and your body, and it's releasing less of the signals that are not so good for you. So yes, small steps and even a few pounds weight loss can start really making a big difference for how you feel and how your body's functioning inside of you in ways that you can't even see. So what steps can you take? Well, we already learned that reducing portions is a great idea. And what I like about that concept is I'm not telling you to change and stop eating everything you love. I'm just saying cut back a little bit, and that can make a big difference. Second, adding a healthy food can make a big difference in your diet, because if you add something healthy, by default, it's probably likely that something unhealthy is going to start creeping out of your diet. So a great thing to sneak into your diet is more fruits and vegetables. And something we've adopted in the Corbin household is we have one of those little tiny blenders that makes smoothies really, really fast. You can load up a whole bunch of frozen wild blueberries, can get them all year. Don't have to wait till they're in season. Put some oats in there, put some milk in there, put some walnuts in there, blend it all up. It's got protein, it's got fiber, it's got great stuff in it. And it tastes so good, my husband even drinks them. So that's really good. Another thing you can do is a pantry makeover. So I know a little bit about nutrition, but I still love the junk food. So if it's in my house, there's a pretty good probability I'm going to eat some. But if we keep it away from our house, or at a minimum at least, then there's less chance that I'm going to fall to that temptation, because I don't care how smart you are. That vanilla ice cream coated in white chocolate sure sounds a lot more fun than an apple for dessert. So I try to keep the house low on things like that. Think about beverages. So those 98 grams of sugar pretty much provided all the calories in that beverage, which I think is probably around 320. So if you cut your calorie intake by about 1,500 or so in a week, which would be just one soda a day of that size, you could lose a few pounds a week. So it can make a big difference. And then change your plate size, and not only that, but the proportions of the food. So bump up your veggies and your fruits, your whole grains, and bump down the things that have lots of fat and artificial things. And finally, as far as practical information, I want to talk about exercise. Now, I don't know nearly as much about exercise as my good friends and collaborators at App State, but I do know this. If I told you right now that I knew of something that increased your metabolism safely and it prevented you from having disease, and I told you it came in a bottle and that I had it in my car, there would be a stampede right now to my car to buy these magic bottles for me. But if I told you that exercise does the exact same thing, you might not have the same reaction. And I know exercise, it's not always that fun. My solution to boring exercise is Zumba. I do Zumba all the time. I love it. It's like dancing and exercising all at the same time. But you can find your own thing, but definitely exercise is important. But I can prove it to you. This graph here is from a study with App State where we put people in our metabolic chamber. You've probably heard we have a room where you can stay for almost 24 hours and we'll measure your metabolism every minute that whole time. So we did this study where we wanted to say, okay, we've heard this myth or this thought process that if you exercise, you keep burning calories for the rest of the day. We wanted to measure whether that was true. So what you see is two lines here. You see the black line at the bottom. That's the day the subjects were resting. Now you see the blue line, and you see this big bump here. Whoop! They burned a whole lot more calories because they were on the bike. Okay, we would expect that. Duh. But now we could measure for the whole rest of the day. And if you look carefully, that blue line basically stays above the black line for about 14 hours. Doesn't look like much, and it wouldn't mean much unless it was statistically significantly different, meaning that there wasn't a bunch of noise, that consistently every person who came in had higher metabolism for that period of time. That's the only way we would get significant results. Well, that little difference that I honestly didn't think was going to mean anything actually added up to those subjects burning an extra 200 or so calories for the rest of the day. That really motivated me to do more exercise because I know I'm getting a whole lot more bang for my buck, that the benefit keeps going for quite a long time. And if I could just get myself maybe to go at least every other day, and I know that I get that lasting benefit, then maybe that would be enough. So definitely exercise. And, I chose the term let's move on purpose because Kannapolis as a city is part of Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign to reduce obesity, and we have a committee of people from CMC and from North Carolina Research Campus and from Kannapolis City Schools. We're all sitting there trying to figure out how we can get this community more active. We could come up with the best ideas ever, and if y'all don't do any of it, it's not worth the effort. So I want to encourage you to think about if you're healthy enough to exercise, to get more active and make Kannapolis an example of what a fit community can look like. So, I've talked a lot, and I believe a lot in the work that we do collectively as a campus, and I think we can do better, and that it's worth doing all this work. But I'm sorry to tell you that none of the fancy science that we do is ever going to prove that a cookie is better for you than broccoli. So my point is that common sense and tried and true nutrition principles are not going to go away. Those are still going to be very important. So why is the work we do, why does it matter? Well, because I showed you that bell curve. With those general nutrition recommendations, we can help a lot of people. And quite frankly, if we were all doing those things, we would, as a nation and as a globe, be a whole lot healthier. But it's the ability to take that knowledge and tweak it so that it's optimized for you and for you and for you, so that you have the best chance possible of being successful. That's what I think is really important, because frankly, I think the reason that diets don't work and people get so discouraged is because, well, it worked for their friend, but it didn't work for them. If we could prescribe things that would work for the individual, I think people would be much more likely to stick to them. Nobody's going to eat perfectly, but I think we'd be a lot more successful with nutrition intervention. So I'm getting to the end here. So in summary, the reason I state that diets don't work is because there's not one single diet that works for everybody. But science is making great strides in understanding how nutrition can keep us healthy. So what can we do right now? I'll leave you with the 3 Ps. First, be patient. I hope you got from tonight that science is complicated, and when there's conflict in the information that you hear, is not because we don't know what we're doing, is because it's going to take us a little time to figure it out. Second, personalize it. Nobody knows you better than you. You know your weak points, you know what aspects of what you're doing you can change, and you know what works for you. For some people, 6 small meals a day works great. For some people, it doesn't. So there's a little bit of trial and error, but once you find something that works for you, then that's the best idea. And finally, be proactive. And that has a few parts. First, take charge of your health. I think that we all could do a little better of taking care of ourselves so that we are healthier, so we're not burdening the healthcare system as much, so that we're setting a good example for our kids and our grandkids. Also learn. I gave you several tools where you can go and you can learn a little bit more maybe than you know already. Now, I don't expect all of you to go get Ph.D.s, although that would be really awesome. But you can definitely learn a little bit more so that you can take what you hear from someone who claims to be an expert or from the TV or from the magazine, and you can think about it and see if it makes sense. Finally, be an agent of change. At the end of the day, we're the ones who spend money. We're the consumers of food. We're the consumers of healthcare. So if you're not happy with how much sugar is in everything, as a single individual, there's probably not a whole lot you can do, but if we all had common goals and push for change, it can happen. Look at trans fats. People kept pushing and pushing and pushing for change, and it's changed. And finally, get involved. One thing you can get involved with is doing just what you've done tonight. Come to our programs, learn, tell other people about our campus. Second, and I think the most important thing, and really the last thing I want to say, is that all the research that we do depends on you. We can't do studies on humans without humans. We can do a lot with animal models and petri dishes, but that only takes us so far. So please, keep up with our campus, get on our mailing list, learn about our studies, and if you think you're a good candidate for a study and you have the desire to participate, please do, because we really do need you. So with that said, I personally hate the word diet. I have this magnet on my refrigerator, I kid you not, but I want you to change your mindset and not think about diet in the sense that it's this horrible, boring, awful thing. But think about nutrition, and think about the power of nutrition to improve your health. And this is not a new concept. This concept of food as medicine was put out by Hippocrates many centuries ago, and I believe it's even more true today based on the knowledge we have. So with that, I would like to thank you so much for your attention, and I'd be happy to take your questions. Yes. What would be the healthiest substitute for sugar is the question. Okay, you're not going to like the answer. I just try not to use it at all. For beverages, I stick to water or things that are not sweetened. As far as the artificial sweeteners, it's really hard to say, but I think we don't understand how they all work yet, so I would use them in moderation. I think the best thing is, I know this is North Carolina, and you have to have your sweet tea. I understand. But if you start cutting back a little bit on the sugar, little by little, you can just reduce the amount you use, and I actually think that's your best bet. How about stevia? Yep, it's made from a plant, and I don't know that we know everything about it. And I would say in moderation, they're probably all okay. But I think that your best bet is stick to natural things and cut back on added sugars. Did you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering, from a nutritional standpoint, in general, what's better, cooked vegetables or raw? Because I've read that the heat destroys some nutrients when you cook it, but
Good question. So he asked, which is better, cooked vegetables or raw? It depends on the cooking method. If you boil your vegetables in a lot of water, any vitamin that's water soluble, meaning that it dissolves in water, is going to come out of the vegetable and into the water. So if you boil broccoli, your water turns green. That's some of the vitamins leaching out. But if you're steaming, then cooking is perfectly fine. You preserve a lot of the nutrients. Whether cooked vegetables are better for digestion, I don't know the answer to that. But I would say either raw or not boiled. Just steamed would probably be your best bet. Yes? So she's asking whether stir frying in olive oil is okay. I think that's perfectly fine because you're not using a whole lot of fat. That's the benefit of stir frying. It's high heat, so you can keep the amount of oil down and get your veggies, and can stick brown rice in there instead of white and get a lot more fiber. Yes?
Do you think diet drinks make you gain weight? I read somewhere where the substance in it makes your body think it's like the sugars and it does something.
So do diet drinks with artificial sweeteners make you gain weight? Well, I think there's some thought or some studies that you end up craving more sweets because you get this thing that tastes sweet, but you don't get the calories. But I don't know that we know the answer definitively to that yet. I still think that because those diet drinks, especially the ones that have all the artificial colors and all that stuff, there's still not a lot of health benefit in those, whether they're diet or regular. I'd still say minimize. I thankfully, my parents didn't raise me on soda, so I'm totally fine not ever drinking soda. But I realize for others of you, that's not the case, and you would really miss it. So really the key is moderation. I don't think a soda or two here or there is a big deal. I'll tell you a little secret. Dr. Zeisel drinks soda all the time. Not a ton of it, but he does drink it. Shh, don't tell him. I hope he doesn't watch this on YouTube. I might get in trouble. Scott, you have some web questions? Okay.
The chart, the metabolic human chart,
Yes.
where you showed the exercise is spiked, how long was that time period of exercise? And is that, if I'm a calculator when I decide, oh, I'm going to go exercise, do I immediately get the effects of the burning calories throughout the rest of the day, or is it, after how many times, et cetera? And then I had a question for the chat.
Okay, so the question was, the study I showed with the chamber where they burn a lot of extra calories, how long was the exercise? The exercise was 45 minutes on a bike. The bike was inside the chamber, and the people were coached by the App State folks so that they kept the same pace the whole time up to a certain intensity. It was pretty moderate/high intensity, not super high. I mean, we didn't have athletes in there. We had regular folks, some of them that didn't exercise that much, and they could do it. They needed a little motivation, but we all could probably do a little more than we think. So the second part of the question was, will you get the benefit if you exercise less, especially if you're not used to exercising? We don't know that. This is actually the first study that's been able to quantify this way. But I think that any exercise is good, and that in my viewpoint, you should do as much as you can handle, and you'll get stronger as you go along. In fact, besides Zumba, I do yoga, so I'm like all over the place, right? And we have folks in that class who are in their 70s, their 80s, and the first time they come to class, they kind of look at me like, wow, you're really limber, and I don't think I could do that. And I say, don't worry, keep coming, you'll get better. And they keep coming, and they get better. So your body is amazing. It's never too late to start, and you'll get better. So I'd say just start.
Another question from the chat. What are your thoughts on the new buzzword of clean eating, grass versus grain-fed beef, and Weight Watchers?
So are those two separate questions?
What it says.
Okay.
Grass versus grain-fed beef, question mark, Weight Watchers, question mark.
Okay. So on the internet, somebody wants to know, what do I think about clean eating, which is something about grain-fed versus grass-fed, grass versus grain-fed beef? Actually, I have no idea. I think that we used to do a lot of farming and have ranches and grow our own stuff, and it was local, and I think that's the way we should be moving towards. So less chemicals, less pesticides, less hormones, buy local. So that's probably what the clean eating is going towards. Whether there's proof that there's a ton of benefit, I'm not sure the studies have been done, but there's probably no harm in it if it's cleaner. And then they wanted to know what I think of Weight Watchers. There's The one thing I like about Weight Watchers is that you're able to stick to your usual foods, just watch the amounts, and that's a good concept. But if the only thing you like are Cheetos and you spend all your points on Cheetos, technically you're still following, sort of the points thing, but you're missing the point of overall healthy stuff. And I've never been to a Weight Watchers meeting or anything, but I'm sure that they try to coax everybody to eat healthy and not just eat Cheetos. But I think some maybe would forget that it's not just about the points, it's about the quality of the foods that make up your points. So I think it's actually a great plan. I have a really great friend that lost a lot of weight on that, and she's doing fantastic. So if that type of accounting system works for you, go for it. Yes, I know you had a question. Okay, she wants to know, when is someone going to do something about high fructose corn syrup and partially hydrogenated oils? Well, the partially hydrogenated oils piece, they're using a whole lot less of those in our food. So you can be pretty glad that you can find a lot of stuff with less. You'll still find it with some. And again, it's going to take a collective body of people pushing towards getting rid of it altogether. But little tiny amounts that are still there, okay. But then that comes back to the whole moderation thing, because you can buy something that says 0 trans fats, which would lead you to believe that it's got no hydrogenated oils. But when you look at the ingredients, it'll still have hydrogenated oils. So 0 can mean less than half a gram. So if you eat 100 servings, you get 50 grams. So moderation is the key. As far as high fructose corn syrup, and I'm guessing you're meaning, when are we going to get it out of the food supply? I think that's coming down too. And I think if you focus on less processed foods, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of high fructose corn syrup, so you should be okay. Now, do I think that high fructose corn syrup is worse for you? There are studies about fructose, and there are specific associations with problems with it, but do we know for 100% sure? I don't know. But I think the answer is the less we process stuff, the better. Even if we don't know all the answers, that seems to make a whole lot of sense to me.